Hi there, this is Reading Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, Chapter 19. You're going to like this chapter. It's a pivotal one, and I'm actually going to do more reading than commentary in this one, maybe 50-50. You need to hear the narrator's voice, as it is here that he arrives at the top of the mountain. So they are camping on the side of the mountain still, near Bozeman, with all their stuff still over at the DeWeese's house. And as the narrator awakes the next morning, remember they went to sleep at the end of chapter 18, he remembers the first dream he has that is depicted in this book. In the dream, I was standing in a white painted room looking at a glass door. On the other side was Chris and his brother and mother. Chris was waving at me from the other side of the door, and his brother was smiling, but his mother had tears in her eyes. Then I saw that Chris's smile was fixed and artificial, and actually there was a deep fear. I moved toward the door, and his smile became better. He motioned for me to open it. I was about to open it, but then didn't. His fear came back, but I turned and walked away. It's a dream that has occurred often before. Its meaning is obvious and fits some thoughts of last night. He's trying to relate to me, and he is afraid he never will. Things are getting clearer up here. So I find this an interesting interpretation. Sure, it's valid, but why is he not acknowledging the more tangible meaning of this dream? He says, the meaning is obvious and fits some thoughts of last night. He's trying to relate to me and is afraid he never will. Well, I think there's obviously, a more obvious meaning of this dream, but that doesn't seem to be really acknowledged here. And it's really only one aspect of what happened to the narrator. So Chris hasn't slept well. Something kept him up. I bet we didn't go to sleep until 3. 3? If he stayed awake, he's going to pay for it today. Well, I got to sleep, I say. He looks at me strangely. You kept me awake. Me? Talking. In my sleep, you mean? No, about the mountain. Something is odd here. I don't know anything about a mountain, Chris. Well, you talked all night about it. You said at the top of the mountain we'd see everything. You said you were going to meet me there. I think he's been dreaming. How could I meet you there when I'm already with you? I don't know. You said it. He looks upset. You sounded like you were drunk or something. Remarkably, the narrator avoids talking about any of this. He just goes on with the morning. So what's going on here? Well, it won't be answered in this chapter, but it's a setup for something. Still, it's worth contemplating why he doesn't even acknowledge his behavior at all, not even to us. I mean, a lot of times the narrator will say, well, this is what I think of Chris, and this is what I think of the situation. You know, he'll let us in on his thought process, but he doesn't do this here. It's kind of odd. There's some kind of denial, or maybe he just can't process it. Also worth noting, again, is the significance of the mountain. At the top of the mountain, we see everything, the high country of the mind. But only one part of the narrator has actually gone there. So who wants to meet Chris at the top of the mountain? That's a good question. Meanwhile, the quality Chautauqua is going to continue, and this is phase 2 of the crystallization of, his theory. And this is the second phase, which he has already acknowledged was not so fun. It's the metaphysical phase, and in my view, during this Chautauqua, he has what I believe is the most critical revelation of this book, at least in terms of the actual metaphysics. However, before his revelation and leading up to this revelation, he has to defend to his academic superiors the fact that he's working on this problem of quality in an academic setting. And therefore, he receives the obvious question from the higher-ups. This was brought about in response to Phaedrus's wild meanderings about quality when the English faculty at Bozeman, informed of their squareness, this is when he tells them that You know, if you don't know what quality is, you're incompetent. Informed of their squareness, presented him with a reasonable question. Does this undefined quality of yours exist in the things we observe, they ask, or is it subjective, existing only in the observer? It was a simple, normal enough question, and there was no hurry for an answer. Ha! There was no need for hurry. It was a finisher offer, a knockdown question, a haymaker, a Saturday night special, the kind you don't recover from, because if quality exists in the object, then you must explain why scientific instruments are unable to detect it. You must suggest instruments that will detect it, or live with the explanation that instruments don't detect it, because your whole quality concept, to put it politely, is a large pile of nonsense. On the other hand, if quality is subjective, existing only in the observer, then this quality that you make so much of is just a fancy name for whatever you like. What Phaedrus had been presented with by the faculty of the English Department of Montana State College was an ancient logical construct known as a dilemma which is Greek for two premises, has been likened to the front end of an angry and charging bull. The bull is a great metaphor because you're damned one way or the other. One horn is going to impale you. So which one do you want it to be? Does it matter? One is that quality is objective, scientifically measurable, and the other is that, or rather objective, and it's scientifically measurable, and the other is that it's subjective, that it's anything you like. The third is that it's not one or the other. And for those of you like Phaedrus, trained in logic, which I am not, but if you are trained in logic, you're going to know that there is a third choice. And there are also some other tactics to work on this problem, I guess, in logic. I'm learning this from this book. There are rhetorical approaches. And so he names these. One is to throw sand in the bull's eyes. The other is to sing it to sleep. And these are temporary ways of subverting, having to make a choice. So the sand in this case would be, of course, how he indicated that anyone who doesn't know what quality is incompetent, so you better keep quiet about it or you're going to be seen that way. But he figures that should he debate Socrates, should he encounter Socrates in this case, Socrates would say, well, I'm obviously incompetent, so could you tell this poor incompetent soul what quality is? And of course, Socrates would tear him apart on this one, since Phaedrus wouldn't be able to ultimately prove what it was. The Church of Reason is only interested in the truth. The lullaby would be, or singing the bull to sleep rather, would be flattering the staff into helping him, saying, "Well, I'm stuck. Maybe you fine intellects can help me understand quality, but it's too late for that because he's already kind of alienated himself from them, and they're just sitting around chuckling, waiting for him to fail, basically." A third rhetorical alternative to the dilemma, and the best one in my opinion, was to refuse to enter the arena. Phaedrus could simply have said, the attempt to classify quality as subjective or objective is an attempt to define it. I've already said it is undefinable and left it at that. I believe DeWeese actually counseled him to do this at the time. Why he chose to disregard this advice and chose to respond to this dilemma logically and dialectically rather than take the easy escape of mysticism, I don't know, but I can guess. I think, first of all, he felt that the whole Church of Reason was irreversibly in the arena of logic, that when one put oneself outside logical disputation, one put oneself outside any academic consideration whatsoever. Philosophical mysticism, the idea that truth is undefinable and can be apprehended only by non-rational means, has been with us since the beginning of history. It's the basis of Zen practice, but it's not academic. However, for me, this really stands out because I think one thing that we are looking at these days is figuring out the meaning crisis, etc., and some of the dialogues we're having here in this corner of the internet is something akin to mysticism. And I know that that is a taboo word in the circles where rationality rules, you know, the death of God and all that, and the modern rejection of religion because it's oppressive. This has been our culture. What's more, any of that rekindling of mysticism, you know, the 60s type of New Age stuff, is kind of accompanied with that dismissive woo-woo feeling. And I think that is what's still associated with mysticism, but I believe that is changing. And as Persig has just pointed out, the mysticism he means is the mysticism behind Zen, and that is a very respectable mysticism indeed. The first horn of Phaedrus's dilemma was, if quality exists in the object, why can't scientific instruments detect it? This horn was a mean one. From the start, he saw how deadly it was. If he was going to presume to be some super scientist who could see in objects quality that no scientist could detect, he was just proving himself to be a nut or a fool or both. In today's world, ideas that are incompatible with scientific knowledge don't get off the ground. He turned his attention to the other horn of the dilemma, which showed more promise of refutation. He thought, so quality is whatever you like? It angered him. The great artists of history, Raphael, Beethoven, Michelangelo, they were all just putting out what people liked. They had no goal other than to titillate the senses in a big way. Was that it? Well, that's certainly what what artists do now. Then he saw it. He brought out the knife and excised the one word that created the entire angering effect of that sentence. The word was just. It was purely a pejorative term whose logical contribution to the sentence was nil. Now that the word was removed, Now with that word removed, the sentence became quality is what you like, and its meaning entirely changed. But society, nonetheless, it's not just what you like, it's what you like. Okay, is that better in terms of society? Because if you want to fit into society, there's a lot of stern reprimand to those members of society who do what they like. Phaedrus began to wonder how all this condemnation of what you like ever seemed such a natural objection in the first place. Soon he saw there was much more to this than he had been aware of. When people said, don't do just what you like, they didn't just mean obey authority. They also meant something else, and the something else opened up into a huge area of classic scientific belief, which stated that what you like is unimportant because it's all composed of irrational emotions within yourself. Now, I know I go on and on about this guy, but we all have people who influence us, so I'm going to again return to the work of neuroscientist Jaak Panksepp, who uncovered the neuroscientific elements of emotion, or at least put them all in one place. So liking to Jaak Panksepp is a very big deal, in fact. And his experiments were about liking and not liking. So the animal would say a part of the brain would be triggered with a whatever you call those things, an electrode inserted to a certain area of the brain that would create the feeling of anger, and or sadness, or joy, or seeking. And if it was a negative emotion, the animal would hit the lever to turn it off as fast as possible. And if it was a positive emotion, such as seeking, such as joy, such as care, such as play, these are Panksepp's concepts, they would hit the lever to get more of it. And liking and disliking are all very big deal when it comes to who we are on an emotion. It is an emotional thing, but it is extremely important. It is positive and negative emotion. It is affective neuroscience. And this dichotomy is probably the most important capacity we have on a evolutionary level. I mean, if you go towards what you like and away from what you don't like, you survive. So the capacity to discern what is good is critical. So it almost seems odd that it almost seems odd that emotions were so considered unimportant for so long. And remember, for a long time you had the black box, which was behaviorism, and this is one thing Pagsep really objects to, is a long time you just couldn't study neuroscience. You had to just study what came in the black box and what came out, and anything within the brain was considered unimportant. The only thing that was important was what went in, what was the stimulus, and what was the response. So we're lucky we're beyond that phase. But that is how you would, that is a very apt demonstration of how important emotions are to the Church of Reason, let's just say. The Church of Reason is also responsible for what you like being just what you like, pertaining to quality. He looked for the origin of the epithet just through the lenses of two sects of the Church of Reason, and these were scientific materialism and classic formalism. Scientific materialism, which is commoner among lay fellows of science than among scientists themselves, holds that what is composed of matter or energy is measurable by the instruments of science is real. Anything else is unreal, or at least of no importance. What you like is unmeasurable and therefore unreal. The whole purpose of scientific method is to make valid distinctions between the false and the true in nature, to eliminate the subjective, unreal, imaginary elements from one's work, so as to obtain an objective, true picture of reality. So quality can be disregarded as imaginary. Never mind that all science, why would we even do science at all if we didn't think that it was a good thing? But this is something we've gone over and over again, so I don't need to flog that dead horse. On the other hand is classic formalism, which insists that what isn't understood intellectually isn't understood at all. Quality in this case is unimportant because it's an emotional understanding unaccompanied by the intellectual elements of reason. So that would be, of course, rationality rules, the Pinker variation of, if you are rational, then you will achieve quality, because rationality is the only way to the good in this Church of Reason thinking, in this Enlightenment now thinking. You can go back and look at Pageau's critique of Steven Pinker. So this is a situation where the classic formalism is what we're talking about when we're talking about a way of thinking in which rationality is considered the only route to the good. He refutes the first argument by demonstrating that the number 0 is not measurable scientifically. Yet no sane scientist, especially a computer scientist, would deny that 0 is real. He then went on with other scientific concepts such as energy and 0, one by one, showing how they could not possibly exist independently of subjective considerations. He ended up with the law of gravity, the example I gave John and Sylvia on the first night of our trip. It's chapter 3. If subjectivity is eliminated as unimportant, he said, then the entire body of science must be eliminated with it. Yes, and this is something we do talk about a lot in this corner. This seems to put him in the camp of idealism with Hume and Kant, etc. And if you want to know more about some of the philosophical concepts in this book, I recommend the guidebook. Here it is, the guidebook to Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, because if you want to study these philosophers and you have time to do it, that's great, but a lot of us don't. We want to know what he's talking about. And this book is pretty good about it. He'll give you kind of an overview of Kant, an overview of Hume, etc. But this goes into it a little bit more. There's a whole section on Western philosophy. There's a section on Eastern philosophy, but there's one on Western. It'll help you with the ideas, of empiricism, idealism, and other philosophical concepts. At this point, the whole subjective horn of the dilemma looked almost as uninspiring as the objective one, and the arguments of classical formalism when he started to examine them, made it even worse. These were extremely forceful arguments that you shouldn't respond to your immediate emotional impulses without considering the big rational picture. What's being said is, don't base your decisions on romantic surface appeal without considering classic underlying form. This was something he kind of agreed with. What made it so ominous was that it seemed to answer a question that had arisen often in class, and which he always had to answer somewhat casuistically. This was the question, if everyone knows what quality is, why is there such a disagreement about it? This is a big deal, as you can see. Why, if everyone knows what quality is, why does everyone think different things have different, levels of quality? Why do people think some things are high quality and other people think other things are high quality? Quality is the same, but the objects that are considered to have quality frequently vary from person to person and based on their temperament. So we go back to the classic romantic divide. Does that mean there are two kinds of quality? Because the romantic people will say, well, the quality is in its appearance, and the classic people will say, no, the quality is in its underlying form. And like the motorcycle, like John's motorcycle, it might be screwed up on the inside, but it looks great on the outside. The narrator's motorcycle is kind of dirty looking and, on the outside, but inside it runs beautifully. So which one is higher quality? That might very well depend on temperament. So that's like hip quality and square quality, the quality of aesthetics, the quality of form. And so now quality, while to the narrator this represented the good, the true, the beautiful, now it's divided. And this is very frustrating for him, and he has an intuition that it should not be divided. His simple, neat, beautiful, undefined quality was starting to get complex. He didn't like the way this was going. The cleavage term that was going to unify the classic and romantic ways of looking at things had itself been cleaved into two parts and could no longer unify anything. It had been caught in an analytic meat grinder. So is quality mind, or is it matter? Actually, this whole dilemma of subjectivity, objectivity, of mind-matter with the relationship to quality was unfair. That mind-matter relationship has been an intellectual hang-up for centuries. And finally, Phaedrus, following a path that, to his knowledge, had never been taken before in the history of Western thought, went straight between the horns of subjectivity-objectivity dilemma and said quality is neither part of mind nor is it part of matter. It's a third entity which is independent of the two. My favorite lines coming up. He was heard along the corridors and up and down the stairs of Montana Hall, singing softly to himself, almost under his breath, "Holy, holy, holy, blessed Trinity." Now, one thing I'm interested in is Pirsig's view of religion, and there are not many specific references to Western religion in this book. We had an interesting reflection in chapter 16 of the way that the language of the Bible had become stagnant and had lost its meaning because it was so far from its original source, its original quality source. The way the Trinity is described in Christianity is not far off at all from what we are looking at here. There is a dynamism between two things, let's just say subject-object united by a third. Or, as we will see, the three interacting dynamically with each other, subjective, objective, classic, romantic, and quality. So his intuition here, and what he perceives to discover, his intuition that this is like the Trinity and what he's working on as discovery is really parallel. You are going to see this. So back to the present, the actual mountain climbing with his son. Chris shouts, "When are we going to get to the top?" "Probably quite a way yet," I reply. "Will we see a lot?" "I think so. Look for blue sky between the trees. As long as we can see sky, we know it's a way yet. The light will come through the trees when we round the top." All right, I like this section because, again, it's a metaphor of what happens in the high country of the mind. When you go up in there, you're going to see trees covering the sky metaphorically. blocking you from the connection to what you're trying to get to, blocking you from the connection to the insight, to the aha moment. And these are blocking you until they no longer do. In a split second, the trees will part. The trees will start, you will see that first glimmer of blue sky peeking through. And during that time, though, that you are hoping for that insight, hoping for that first glimpse of blue sky, you are in the forest, and the forest is peaceful. It's in silence. You are in a place of contemplation of your problem. And you are going to let the sky emerge in that peaceful place. As the narrator notes, Chris is calmed by seeing the sky, and that makes sense. As he says, the forest silence improves anyone. Again, a meditative state, a metaphor for this meditative state that it takes to solve a problem in that high country. The world now, according to Phaedrus, was composed of three things: mind, matter, and quality. So he sits on this for a while. He knows it's there. He knows what he's looking for is there. But since, as he said, the mind-matter divide has plagued us for centuries, so he knows he's not going to solve it right away. But he knows he's found the key in, though, and he's just going to relish this for a while. Eventually, however, he examined it more closely. Although there's no logical objection to a metaphysical trinity, a three-headed reality, such trinities are not common or popular. A metaphysician normally seeks either a monism, such as God, which explains the nature of the world as a manifestation of one single thing, or he seeks a dualism, such as mind-matter, which explains it as two things, or he leaves it as a pluralism, which explains it as a manifestation of an indefinite number of things. But three is an awkward number. Right away you want to know, why three? What's the relationship among them? And as the need for relaxation diminished, Phaedrus became curious about this relationship too. It's interesting, in this corner of the internet, we find there's a dynamic relationship of three, quite natural. And so what's coming up is one of my favorite sections for understanding quality. It really depicts the moment that he sees it. I don't know how much thought passed before he arrived at this, but eventually he saw that quality couldn't be independently related with either the subject or the object, but could only be found in the relationship of the two with each other. It is the point at which subject and object meet. That sounded warm. Quality is not a thing, it's an event. Warmer. It is the event at which the subject becomes aware of the object. And because without objects there can be no subject, because the objects create the subject's awareness of himself. Quality is the event at which the awareness of both subject and objects is made possible. Hot. Now he knew it was coming. This means quality is not just the result of a collision between subject and object. The very existence of subject and object themselves is deduced from the quality event. The quality event is the cause of subjects and objects, which are then mistakenly presumed to be the cause of quality. What a revelation. There it is. Quality is the cause of subjects and objects, and think about the implication of that. If quality is the cause of subjects and objects, what does that make quality? And this is a little hard to grasp, so well, maybe you get it right off the bat, I don't know. It was hard for me to grasp when I first read this. But let's look at this example that people always use to explore subject-object relationships. If a tree falls in the woods and there's no one to hear it, does it make a sound? Well, as it turns out, the sound is a meeting of the crash and of our eardrums. The sound doesn't exist independently. Someone has to have the machinery to perceive sound in order for there to be a sound. So that's a quality event, the meeting of the eardrum and the crash. The word relationship is extremely important in the metaphysical concept of Phaedrus. Everything is in relationship to something else if quality creates subjects and objects. An event, a communion, a relationship. Look at modern cognitive science. The meaning of things is what creates them for us. Remember in Jordan Peterson, he was telling us about the baby looking down the cliff, and they don't know it's a cliff, they just know it's a falling off place. I don't remember who that cognitive scientist was, but that's a really great way of looking at this. So the meaning of things is what creates the things for us. It is our encounter with experience, that happens in the moment, in that relationship, that we will later classify as things, as objects. And we have to have the experience of something to be able to say that it is something. And that experience, if we don't have the experience, then it doesn't exist for us. If we don't have some kind of experience with that thing, then it is non-existence. So that experience is meaning, it's relevance. So basically, in this chapter, we're circling around the top of the mountain. The sky is boundless, and we can see the sun. The sun of quality, he wrote, does not revolve around the subjects or objects of our existence. It does not just passively illuminate them. It is not subordinate to them in any way. It has created them, and they are subordinate to it. The sun doesn't passively illuminate. It actively illuminates. The illumination creates rather than the illumination hits things that are already there. It's a big difference. So there's the parallel narrative going on the mountain climb. Blue sky, shouts Chris. There it is, way above us, a narrow patch of blue through the trunks of the trees. We move faster, and the patches of blue become larger and larger through the trees, and soon we see that the trees thin out to a bare spot at the summit. When the summit is about 50 yards away, I say, let's go, and start to dash for it, throwing into the effort all the reserves of energy I've been saving. I give it everything I have, but Chris gains on me. Then he passes me, giggling. With the heavy load and the high altitude, we're not setting any records, but now we're just charging up with all we have. Chris gets there first, while I just break out of the trees. He raises his arms and shouts, "The winner!" Egotist. So again, Chris is demonstrating that reactive approach to life, the one that requires cooperation from the outside world to dictate his emotional state. So he's going to be a contrast with, let's just say, that sort of meditative, mystical, Zen state that we're going to explore more in this book, and that's already been more than hinted at. So he sort of demonstrates on enlightened mode. And again, most children are going to be thinking in that way. I mean, they're kids. So I think it makes sense to demonstrate, the dukkha mentality in the emotional structure of a child's mind. It's a more primitive state. So we have the two narratives. We have Chris in the narrator as he tries to connect with the sun, and for whatever reason cannot, but it's improving as they ascend the mountain. And so far the problem is centered on Chris and his dukkha, but what is the whole problem? Together they're seeing the blue sky. Together things are getting better. And in the other narrative, Phaedrus has seen the sun of quality. We made it, Chris says. He is very happy. I am still too winded to answer. I take off my boots and socks, which are soggy with sweat, and set them out to dry on a rock. I stare at them meditatively as vapors from them rise up towards the sun. So things really are getting clearer up here. So I hope that made sense, and I will see you next Sunday for Chapter 20.